Okay, it looks like we're recording. Hello, I am so excited to be here and I'm so excited to see our panelists and all the names in the attendees box. I'm sad that I don't get to see everyone's faces and that it's on this virtual platform, after this long year, but I also was talking to some of the panelists before that this might be better for accessibility. And if we can have this conversation with as many people as possible, I think that's really important. Before we get started, I just want to welcome everyone. I'll introduce myself. I'm going to be moderating today. My name is McKenna Thayer, and I'm a 2L with the Wayne Law NLG board. I personally am an abolitionist, so I am really excited to be having this conversation with some incredible panelists. And this is part of our Week Against Mass Incarceration. The Week Against Mass Incarceration is a national movement that started a few years ago, or I guess more than a few, after the NLG adopted a resolution that called for the dismantling and abolition of all prisons and of all aspects of systems and institutions that support, condone, create, fill, or protect prisons. So that's kind of why we're here. In a broader movement to end mass incarceration, I think abolition plays a really specific and important role in that. I want to give a quote that the NLG kind of grounds us in as we go into WAMI and as we go throughout WAMI, the Week Against Mass Incarceration, from Angela Davis. And that's: prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And I think that's important, that quote specifically, because that's why we're here, and abolition is why we're here to talk about the specific solution to just one of the biggest problems that we're facing as a country. So I want the panelists to introduce themselves because I'm so excited to hear from you and not just have me talking. So I'm just going to go across my screen so you can introduce yourselves to the attendees. If you can say name, pronouns, and kind of where you work so we can get an idea for what you do, that would be great. Let's start with Victoria.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Victoria Burton-Harris, the Chief Assistant Prosecutor in Washtenaw County. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And prior to serving as the Chief Assistant Prosecutor starting January 1st of this year, I spent my career and time serving my community in Detroit as a public defense attorney. As a criminal defense attorney and public defender.
Thank you. Let's go to Cait.
Good afternoon, everyone, and so excited to be here. So my name is Cait Grady, and I'm a staff attorney with Neighborhood Defender Service, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm excited to be with you today.
Thank you. Nancy?
Good afternoon, everyone. Nancy Parker, pronouns she, her, hers. I'm a staff attorney with the Detroit Justice Center, where I work in the legal services and advocacy practice. Prior to that, I was a labor attorney for over 8 years.
And Ellie, last but not least.
Well, great to be here with you all. My name is Eli Savit, and I am the prosecuting attorney for Washtenaw County.
I'm so excited to have you all here today, and I want to jump right into the questions and why we're here. So I figured I'd ask a question, and then I can either call just across my screen similar to that, or if anyone is like, ooh, I want to answer that, then we can also kind of do it that way. So I think in this work and in public interest work, we have both our personal beliefs and we work with organizations. So I want to start with, on a personal level, what does prison abolition mean to you? So let's start again with Victoria.
For me, it means a couple of things. Reducing the amount of people that are going into cages. Being more creative with alternative ways to deal with the harms that we see in our community, using my power as a prosecutor to be intentional about divesting from jails and prisons and investing in people and in communities, and really breaking the cycle of mass incarceration. As a defense attorney, I saw people going in and out of the criminal justice system like a revolving door. And as a prosecutor, reading through files and, very long criminal histories, I really see it. And jails and prisons are not effective. They're not keeping us safe. And they actually are exacerbating the problem. And so, when you talk about ending mass incarceration, I want people to understand that that it's bigger than just, the jails and prisons in our country. You have to take into account that people are under the state's control when they're on probation or parole. We have about 2.3 million people in prison, and we have about 5 million people who are imprisoned in their own homes because of probation and parole. And you got to look at the impact that prisons have on the back end. They restrict where you live. They restrict the public dollars that you can have to go to school. They restrict, families' rights. There are certain people that you cannot live with if you come back from prison and you're labeled a felon. If someone in your house wants to exercise their Second Amendment rights to have a gun, you can't live with them if you have a felony. You can't be anywhere near that person. And so that, it reaches into people's lives and their families and in their homes. And that's why, prisons are so harmful. They don't work, and it's more of a reason why we need to be moving away from them. Is it going to happen overnight? No. But for me, prison abolition means everything that you do and every power that you have is working toward ending mass incarceration and not sending people into those harmful cages, and instead looking at more creative solutions.
Thank you. That was amazing. I'm so excited. Cait, what does prison abolition mean to you?
Yeah. This is when I got this question ahead of time, I was like, oh my God, I have so many different things that I would want to bring into this answer. So bear with me as I try to weave a few different things. I really appreciate Victoria, expanding out beyond just like prison, but like who is under state surveillance. And I want to zoom out a little bit even further and talk about the interrelationship between racism and materialism and militarism, right? So Dr. King's giant triplets. And for me, abolition starts with my family. So I was raised, my dad was a veteran of both the Army and the Marines. My dad volunteered to fight in Vietnam. And after he came home from Vietnam, he underwent this transformation. And in my dad's words, he came to understand war as nothing more than organized state-sanctioned murder. So my dad goes through this process, and he married my mom, and I have 3 sisters. And part of that transformation for my dad meant that he did a lot of different actions of civil disobedience challenging militarism, right? So he got arrested at the Pentagon, at anti-war demonstrations, many different, especially around the Iraq War, leading up to that invasion. There was a huge anti-war movement across the country. And so as a result of my dad's decision, his political decision, right, to challenge militarism, it led me and my dad and my family into courtrooms, right? So I grew up watching my dad be on trial. My dad, served time in county jails, in private prisons, and in federal prison. My aunt currently is serving a year-long sentence in federal prison for an action challenging nuclear preparations for developing nuclear weapons and challenging U.S. militarism as through our maintaining of nuclear weapons. So that's, my experience of the criminal legal system is both personal and also like political in terms of my understanding of the interrelationship between how the US spends so much money, so much of our federal budget goes towards, preparations for war and war making. Just like our local budgets, the Detroit City Council right now is looking at increasing the Detroit Police Department's budget right now. So looking at both nationally and then, globally, how the US exports violence across the globe and how it actually happens in our communities too on the ground. So for me, the abolitionist Ruth Wilson Gilmore has a quote that she says, "Abolition is about presence, not absence. It's about building life-affirming institutions." So for me, this experiences of both visiting my dad, seeing my dad be one of, like in DC, for example, seeing my dad be one of the few white people there. And I knew my dad's not there because of the color of his skin. My dad's was not, somebody who's like targeted and policed just because of who he is, because he made choices, right? And for me, like growing up and seeing the systemic issues in a very personal way has led me to try to understand the relationship of the carceral state, right? Through of upholding both militarism and racism and materialism, which I would say is like capitalism, right? So to thinking about the way that the carceral state upholds all of these systems of oppression that are interlocking. So thanks for bearing with me through that.
Thank you for sharing that on that personal level. That was incredible. Nancy, let's turn to you next. What does prison abolition mean to you?
So when I say prison abolition, I have to include the PIC because I'm a PIC abolitionist and I can't just separate prison abolition. And so when I say PIC abolitionist, I'm talking about the whole prison industrial complex. So not just literally the cages, which we all agree here that they need to be dismantled, but also the whole institution. So when I talk about PIC abolition, we talk about the prisons and the jails and the detention centers and all other forms of incarceration, but also we have to focus on the surveillance aspect as well and the general policing aspect. So I'm not one to say, let's tear down the cages, but maintain our same insistence on this systems of oppression that come from different angles. The four walls, the structures of the prisons and jails are concrete. Therefore, they're easy for people to see and identify. But what's usually as harmful, if not more harmful, are the intangible oppressions that occur every day. And so as a PIC abolitionist, what that means to me is, it means I'm striving for a world where Black people who look like me, can be free. Because right now, if you're Black in this country, you do not feel free. You don't know the true sense of that word. Your body is a weapon. We can literally be unarmed. The skin, the color of our skin is our weapon. And to be a Black woman in this society walking around and to know that I have children coming up in this world, I have to be an abolitionist because I cannot want them to live in a world to replicate all the harm that has occurred to us. So as Victoria talked about and Cait, I want a world where we can build up the essentials that everyone needs. So when I'm thinking of abolition, I see a completely different world where people have their essential needs met. People have food, water, utilities, housing, employment, childcare, everything that is attainable, not to demean people and say, well, you have to suffer because you're born with a certain color or you're born in a neighborhood, but no, let's take care of our brothers and sisters. And I want a world that is free of punishment. And we now, everyone here, we use the term either criminal legal system or criminal punishment system, because we know it is not a justice system. It is purely punitive. And I cannot sit every day not doing anything, knowing that there just punishment going on in four walls, as well as everyday policing that causes so much harm. And so we have to dismantle all those things as we continue to build this better world for our children. And I just like to last end with this quote from Marian Kaba that says, abolition is a vision, a practice, and a movement. So we should all be abolitionists and we should all be practicing it every day in our work and in our personal lives. Thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing. Okay, finally, Ellie, tell us what prison abolition means to you.
Well, and you make me go last, and I'm not sure how much more I can expand on what the other three panelists said. But look, at its core, it is about reimagining public safety. Because there is this sense out there that we can either have incarceration or we can have public safety, but we cannot have both. That is simply not true. The United States of America locks up more people per capita than any nation on the face of this planet, which is something that should gnaw at all of us and at our sense of justice and fairness. But look, if incarceration meant that we were protecting public safety, the United States, the world's leader in incarceration, would be the safest country in the world. But we're not. We're not even close. And that demonstrates that what we have been doing in our criminal system is fundamentally wrong. Punishment, confinement, surveillance, it doesn't keep us safer. And indeed, in many cases, it makes matters worse. When you rely on caging people, when you rely on a punishment system, in many cases, you are exacerbating the trauma that has caused somebody to run afoul of the law in the first place. And that means that when they are released, they may well be less, they may well be more dangerous than they were when they came in. So it's not just that what we're doing isn't working, it's that what we are doing is fundamentally counterproductive in addition to the massive inequities that everybody else referenced. And so the question is, what do we put in its place? And, you know, again, I'm not sure I can say it much better than Nancy, because if you're looking at moving beyond our criminal punishment system and our system that is so reliant on mass incarceration, you need to look at meeting people's fundamental needs in the community, because that is what keeps us safer. Access to housing, access to good paying jobs, access to food and water and healthcare and mental health care and education. That's what keeps us safe in the long term. So to me, this movement is not just about turning the page and incarcerating less people. It is also about fundamentally reimagining and redefining what we are talking about when we are talking about public safety, because far too often we've sat in our little corner in the criminal legal system, which I'm a part of now as of January, and said, look, we don't need to concern ourselves with educational inequities. We don't need to concern ourselves with basic inequities in housing. We don't need to concern ourselves with the opportunity gap. That is wrong. Protecting public safety means ensuring that everybody has the material conditions they need to thrive. And once we do that, we will not have a need for a system of mass incarceration like the one that we have been maintaining.
Thank you. That's also a great segue into our next question, which is, how do you see abolition in your specific field? So we picked panelists that were incredible personally, as we just heard and are amazed by. And we also picked a variety of voices based on, you know, both sides of the aisle or the courtroom in the criminal system. And then we also have Nancy from DJC bringing this community advocacy perspective. So I think I want to start actually with you, Nancy. How do you see abolition in your field at DJC? You know, what are you and your organization doing to work towards abolition?
Thank you. I love this question, McKenna. So I feel so privileged and blessed because I am one of a handful of people that can say that, like, I am working in an organization that is 100% aligned with my personal views. So everything that I said and answered in that first question about what is abolition to me, I can say holds true to my organization. At DJC, we are an abolitionist organization. And so how do I see abolition in our work? I see it literally every day. We have these amazing goals that we have set out for our org, and I implore everyone here to go on Detroit Justice Center website and check them out. But one of our goals is that we believe in the individual and collective liberation of our clients. And when we do that, we're holding all of our clients' freedom dreams as sacred. And so we believe that we can achieve the best possible outcome for all of our clients. And when we do that, again, I'm reiterating, we are practicing abolition. And so part of what we do at DJC, we like to embolden our clients, right? So we're not just saying we're lawyers that have all the knowledge and the powers and the tools, But no, we believe that change occurs from bottom down. When the people have the tools, when the people rise up, when the people say enough is enough, then we see the change. And so even in our direct client representation base, we are working towards systemic change through them. Either, empower, teach a man to fish, he'll eat for forever, right? And so we're trying to empower our clients as well as make systemic change. We were in traffic court a lot, or we had been previously. And that, I always say, it was like we were putting a dirty Band-Aid on a wound, knowing that the Band-Aid was going to fall off as soon as our clients walked out the door. In certain instances, we saved, a mother from being thrown into jail, or we helped someone be able to get their license back. But then we also do bigger change in terms of working with legislatures to get the laws actually change. And so we saw recently in Wayne County, the decriminalization of a bunch of traffic offenses. We saw the not finally stopping, folks who have fines and fees and missed court appearances, revoking their licenses because of that. And so that was one aspect that we consider to be abolitionist work. But then concretely as well, we have a Just Cities Innovative Lab. And in there, that's where we really say, how can we make these freedom dreams fly? Like, what can we do? Let's just think outside the box. And so, we have just been part of launching the new Metro Detroit Restorative Justice program, I believe it's called network, the Restorative Justice Network, that seeks to work with everyone, in the Metro Detroit area, get folks trained up in restorative justice, trained up in transformative justice. So folks aren't prone to pick up the phone and call 911 when there's an issue, when someone's having a mental health crisis, when there's a dispute. Folks will feel emboldened and empowered to say, okay, how can we de-escalate? How can we deal with these issues now that we got this training? Or, now that, we support programs who are centers where you can go for this restorative justice. In addition, at DJC, we have a great Divest Invest coordinator whose sole full-time responsibility is to be creative and say, look, how can we pull some of this money out of DPD, out of the resources in places where we know it's just going to die, and put it back in the community? How can we make sure folks have access to water here? So we don't need a lawsuit that says, please don't shut off people's water during a freaking pandemic. Why is that something we need a lawsuit to do? You know what I mean? So at DJC, we work on all aspects. But we work directly with clients, but we're looking big picture, and we're trying to change the world. Another plug, our EAT practice, our economic equity practice. We have folks working with community organizations that are trying to buy up property and create housing for returning citizens. Everything that we do at DJC is from an abolitionist perspective, and basically we just say, what is the future we want to live in? And what will we tell the generations that we did? And that's how we move at DJC. We try to operate with that, MO, so that we know all the moves we're making is for systemic change for the better.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember I interned with DJC last summer, and this overwhelming feeling of, if the world looked like the one that DJC is trying to build, it was just like a tangible feeling. Every day. I mean, even just trying to as a 1L, write a memo, it was like, this is incredible. I want to turn now to Ellie and Victoria, which either one of you wants to jump in. From the prosecution's perspective, something that has been interesting coming out of your office this, 2021 has been these broad stroke policy changes that I think are, in this direction of abolition and in this movement. So I'd love to hear from both of you, what do you see abolition like in the prosecutor's office on that side of the aisle? And what steps are you taking as an organization working towards abolition?
Much like Nancy, I feel very fortunate and blessed to have landed where I am. And it's because I have a badass partner in crime, Eli Savit. He allows me to be me. He asked me to come on board and help him run his office because he knows that I have a healthy appreciation for my ancestors' history in this country. He knows that I connect everything back in this criminal injustice system to our treatment 400 years ago when we were brought over and enslaved. And he knows that I am unapologetic in my fight for Black liberation and that I want to use my power in this office for good. And that, quite frankly, is what gets me out of bed every morning. And it allows me to sleep like a baby at night. And because from the moment I wake up until the moment I close my eyes, I am doing what sets my soul on fire. And that is using the power of a prosecutor for good. We are diverting people out of this system. I was at our office yesterday for almost 12 hours. And it was because I wanted to go through our entire arraignment list in one of our district courts for this week and look up their files, look through their criminal history, and pinpoint folks that I want diverted out of this system. If you've committed retail fraud 8, 9 times, and I read through the police reports and I see that you've been stealing wine, you've been stealing beer. Well, does that mean that I want you to have yet another retail fraud conviction? No, it means I want you diverted out into the hands of a community partner who can address the obvious need, right? You know, you have an alcohol problem. You are living in poverty. You may even have a mental health issue, right? And those are not issues that are going to be ever effectively addressed through the criminal legal system. You know, and when we're not diverting people out post-charge, we're looking to deflect and send people out of this system before we can even bring them in. Before one of our APAs authorizes a criminal charge, we want to look at a file and say, you know what, restorative justice is where you need to be. We have a budding relationship and partnership with the Washtenaw County Dispute Resolution Center that by this summer, we plan to have this robust restorative justice program modeled after impact justice and common justice, and be able to say, look, we understand that a more holistic approach needs to be taken. We understand that the traditional criminal legal system route is not effective. It does not allow for accountability. It does not allow for crime survivors to get the answers and the help and the healing they need. And again, it kind of keeps you on this hamster wheel if you're a defendant, because you've also never had your trauma and the things that have harmed you effectively addressed. So until that happens, you're not going to have this cycle broken. You're going to continue to commit crimes. You're going to continue to harm people because we've never gotten to the heart of the issue. What has caused you to come into my office to begin with? Oh, like Nancy and Ellie said, you need services for mental health. You need food. And that's why you're stealing food out of the grocery store time and time again, right? You know, whatever it is that you need, I want to spend the time and my power to address that, because that is how we create safer and more just communities. And, you know, we have a dozen policies, literally a dozen, that we rolled out in the first 2 months in office. And I'm going to have Ellie share some of those with you. But as far as I'm concerned, diversion and deflection and restorative justice and having the power to do it, that is the most liberating thing as a Black woman and Black lawyer that I can ever say that I've done with my career thus far.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's turn to Ellie to expand on those new policies.
Well, I mean, first of all, you can see why Victoria and I work so well together, and why we're so thrilled to have her here in Washtenaw. And you know, Victoria laid it out very well. Sort of unique among prosecutors, though this is a growing movement, we are trying to keep people away from the criminal legal system. Our perspective is that if you are in our office, if we were moving forward with a criminal case, that in many ways means that all of us have failed. It is a failure of society writ large when somebody is facing criminal consequences. And so we are trying to do everything that we can to address harm and address needs outside of the criminal legal system in coordination with our partners. Now, Victoria mentioned a lot of the stuff that we have going on and in the works around diversion and deflection and restorative justice as an alternative, not layered on top of our traditional criminal punishment system. But the truth of the matter is there are some things that we can just do as prosecutors because we know that you don't need to be in the justice system to begin with. So many of our initial policy rollouts have been geared towards that. Start with the very first one. The first thing that we did upon taking office in January was we rescinded all zero tolerance policies that this office had previously maintained. And these zero tolerance policies meant under the previous administration that if you come into the system and you are charged with a certain crime, there will be no flexibility. There will be no opportunities for diversion. There will be no plea bargains down to even a misdemeanor if you were charged with a felony. We got rid of all of them. And what we are telling our assistant prosecuting attorneys is your charge is to ensure that the defendant gets the least restrictive means that nevertheless protect public safety, which means in many cases, we want to divert them out of the system, which means that even if we're not diverting them out of the criminal system, we want to give them opportunities to have their records cleared through the Holmes Youthful Trainee Act, through diversion deflection programs, through deferred sentencing programs. So that's something that we did on day one. Day two, we got rid of cash bail in our prosecutor's office because cash bail at its core, I mean, we can talk about prison abolition and incarceration, and I realize that, you know, people can be on different sides of that, but nobody should be comfortable with our unjust and inequitable cash bail system. Cash bail is a system in which you're held in jail because of how much money you have in your bank account before you have been convicted of anything. So we have not sought cash bail on a single case in Washtenaw County in the 2 months plus that we've been in office. You know, and I will tell you, notwithstanding what the for-profit bail bond industry would have you think when you get rid of cash bail, I'm looking out my windows right now, downtown Ann Arbor. It is not anarchy. It is not chaos. We've been able to do that and not jail people because of how much money they have and still kept the community safe. We move forward, and I'm skipping over a few policies related to how we deal with law enforcement. But we said, look, we're not charging marijuana offenses. Period. I know it's legal now, but you know, there's still stuff around the edges that can be criminalized. And I'll tell you, lest you doubt the impact this has on people's lives, we released our marijuana policy, and an APA came into our offices and said, you know, it so happens I've got a case up for a guy that was caught on a train with $300 worth of marijuana. He was charged with a felony. This has been hanging over his head for the last 5 years. What do you want me to do about it? And we said, you are dropping that case. And the next day, that man who had had this hanging over his head for 5 years, the threat of a felony for doing what college kids across the country have done habitually, he saw that his case was totally dismissed, gone. And just think about the weight off his shoulder when that happened. We said we're no longer charging similarly crimes that are based in entheogenic plants, in personal use of psychedelics. Look, I don't know how many people on this call know people who have used psychedelics. I know people, because I grew up in Ann Arbor, who have used psychedelics. And it's a cruel roulette wheel when we act as though the fact that you are unlucky enough to get caught with something means that you need to be punished and subject to criminal consequences. So we're not doing that anymore. Then we said we're not charging buprenorphine possession. You want to talk about harm reduction. Buprenorphine, which is otherwise known by the brand name Suboxone, is a medicine that people use when they are in recovery for opioid use disorder, and they're using it instead of fentanyl or heroin, which can kill them. It's still a schedule. It's still a scheduled drug in the state of Michigan, which means that unauthorized use or possession, or breaking off a little bit to your friend who might also be in recovery, that can carry felony consequences. And we said we're not charging that anymore. Because if you are somebody that's providing that to your friend in recovery, and you can be charged with distribution, then you've probably saved that person's life, because they're not going to go back on fentanyl. So, so we said categorically, we're not charging buprenorphine. Sex work, we said, look, we're not charging consensual sex work anymore. What we know about the charging of consensual sex work is that it causes massive harm. It makes it much more likely that violence or sexual assault that attaches to the sex work industry is going to occur, because buyers know that the sex worker has no place to report it, and they can take advantage of that. It's key to preventing the spread of AIDS and sexually transmitted infections, which is not just my view. That's the view of the World Health Organization, of Amnesty International, of the Lancet, which is the world's leading independent medical journal. So you talk about, how we have made things worse in the criminal legal system. All the doctors are telling us to do something. Why wouldn't we do it? We said we are no longer charging, and let's talk about racial profiling here for a second. We are no longer charging contraband crimes that arise from pretext stops. Pretext stops are stops where, maybe people have experienced this. I haven't, because I'm white. But you're pulled over for a minor traffic offense. Officer comes over into your driver's side car window and says, "You mind if I look around your car a little bit?" You don't have, anything on you, right? You wouldn't mind if I just looked around, would you? And of course, everybody feels like they can't say no to an officer. Everybody on this call, I'm sure, knows that you can say no. But that is how racial profiling occurs, because officers engage in fishing expedition against people that do not look like me. We sent a message. We're not interested in those charges anymore. Don't do it. Don't bring it to us. We're not interested in these charges that stem from racial profiling. Then we said we're not charging people related to driving with a suspended license, or if you're a non-citizen that's been unable to get a license, we're not charging you. Then we said we're not in the juvenile system. We're not going to charge these minor, low-level juvenile offenses. Fights in schools. You steal a watch from a classmate's backpack. Low-level experimentation with marijuana or alcohol, which honestly, again, I grew up here, white guy. I did it. The cops said, pour out the beer and run along home. But I know that Black kids that are in the exact same community and jurisdiction that I'm in Ypsilanti, don't get that same set of grace. So we're just saying, look, we're applying the same standards to everybody, and we're giving every young person in this community the benefit of the doubt that white people have always gotten when they are younger. And finally, just this last week, we released a comprehensive set of immigration policies, because incarceration and our criminal legal system has perhaps the most devastating collateral consequences for our non-citizen friends and neighbors. Even a minor crime can render you subject to deportation, even if you're a lawful permanent resident and you've been in this country functionally for your entire life. And we need to take stock of that. We can't just say, oh, well, we don't concern ourselves with immigration consequences. It is unjust and inequitable if somebody who is a non-citizen who may have been here for decades is going to be deported back to a country where functionally they don't know anybody, they don't know the language, for a conduct that a citizen, if they did, would be it wouldn't even result in jail time. In addition to that, we're not cooperating with ICE, so that was low-hanging fruit, and we're prioritizing the issuance of T visas and U visas for non-citizens who are victims of human trafficking or who are victims of very serious crimes, which is something that we have some moral obligation to do. So I ran through most of those, and that's what we're doing to pull the levers in a way that moves beyond our punishment first system.
Thank you. I know that personally I've been seeing something interesting as I see the Facebook posts of the new policies you have popping up on, different groups and different friends who I never knew were excited about this. And it's just like, is a progressive prosecutor an oxymoron? Is that real? And I finally feel like I can say it is real and it's happening. And we have leaders who are doing this. Okay, so Cait, I'm so excited to hear from you about NDS and what it looks like as a public defender, abolition, and what steps you are taking both individually and as an organization.
Definitely. So for those who don't know, NDS stands for Neighborhood Defender Service of Detroit, and we are a public defender office, and we handle 25% of felony cases for Wayne County. And we launched in the summer of 2019. And NDS, we practice a holistic client-centered model of representation. So, this model, like people's criminal problems, right? Their criminal case does not exist in a vacuum. So in recognition of that, we have this team model, and it's a holistic team model. So on every team, our office is split up into 4 different teams. There are attorneys, there are social workers, investigators, and then client advocates. So the idea with this, behind this team model, right, is that we are able to try to help a client address all the other needs that are happening in their life around that are involved in their criminal problem. So, that could look like trying to connect clients to housing services, to mental health care services, and assisting clients even in just getting a ride to court, right? Getting a client a lift. In Detroit, public transportation has been wildly underfunded, and it's a huge issue for people. So even something like making sure your client can actually access their court hearing is a one step that we try to take. Sometimes people will say, oh, public defending and abolition, like you're just part of the problem. And the way that I think about it is saying that, I look at different things and say, does it reduce the number of people who are imprisoned or under state surveillance? So probation, tethers, all of that kind of stuff. And I think for me, like working as a public defender, you're on the front line in a lot of ways of, I want to get to that world of abolition where we're not in this moment, but we are in this moment. And every day people are in the crosshairs of the state sanctioned violence in so many ways. So for me, it's NDS launched, as I said, in summer of 2019. And it's been an incredibly exciting office to be a part of really dedicated, both attorneys, but also all of the other people on our teams, right, are working so hard every day to fight for our clients. That looks like we also practice vertical representation. So there's some public defender offices where a client would be passed from attorney to attorney at different stages of a case. But at NDS, we do vertical representation, meaning that the day I'm assigned a client, I develop a relationship with that client, and I see that client through from the very beginning to the end to the resolution of their case, and sometimes even afterwards get lots of questions and texts from clients who, their cases, they've been sentenced or whatever, but they still need information or access to resources. So that might sound like a small thing, but it's actually a really huge thing, right? Of building of trust for a client, of actually understanding what's happening in this person's life. There's a lot of our clients don't have a stable phone number, right? So a lot of my job is knowing if that number's off, do I call the aunt? Do I call, the mom or the cousin or the sister? And you only know those kind of things if you actually develop a relationship with the person. So it's actually a huge thing. And it feels like a privilege in many ways to actually get to actually develop a real relationship with clients. And so, NDS, we're, as I said, handling 25% of felony cases for the county. We are challenging, holding the preliminary hearings, getting cases dismissed, showing judges when DPD is violating people's rights, showing them when, they say client consented, and then you look at the body cam and the client will not have consented. And being able to actually show those things to a judge and get those cases dismissed. Also getting as many people into diversion programs as possible. So that's kind of like the day-to-day practice. NDS also is, along with like Wayne County Bar Association, advocating for the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office to change its policies. It's so exciting to hear about all these things that are happening in Washtenaw County. And, we need those kinds of changes to be happening in Wayne County. And we need them to be happening like yesterday or years ago. But thinking about how do we, as public defenders, advocate to change the policies that are leading to our clients being in these types of situations, because there are choices made along this process, right? So there's choices about how DPD, who they target and who they arrest and who they bring into the system. Then there's choices of prosecutors are signing warrants authorizing these charges. There's all these points of potential intervention to actually decrease the number of people who are being brought into this system. So NDS is also trying to do advocacy around that. And also, like this last summer, we got to organize as part of the George Floyd uprising. We organized, there was a national day for public defenders to march across the country in support of Black Lives Matter. And NDS, took the lead along with some other organizations of organizing a big march with, there were hundreds of attorneys and legal professionals that came out. into the streets. And as somebody said earlier, I think it might have been Nancy, that like, you know, the real change, in my opinion, is going to come from movements. It's going to come from the streets. It's going to come from people self-determining what safety looks like for them, from communities actually having that power to make those decisions. So I think as I'm, you know, practicing in the courtroom and stuff, I am so grateful for everyone in the street, and I want to keep inviting attorneys to participate in movements in that way too, because I think it's important to actually like put your body out there on the streets and march with people when we have those opportunities.
Thank you all for sharing. I remember Cait going to the Public Defenders March, and from DJC, I was doing the work, and then I went down, and just being a part of this community and hearing all of you speak is just incredible and feels so important. We had another question that I think we can move past, because we've talked a lot about the role prison abolition plays in this broader movement to end mass incarceration, and then even beyond that. So I want to, before we turn, we have about 15 minutes left. I want to open this up to anyone who wants to speak to it. And then we'll go to and get through as many questions from our attendees as we can. Does anyone want to comment on the biggest barriers to abolition that you've seen, or ending mass incarceration, or just kind of any pushback? What's the hardest part in the legal community and in, you know, your job or in your personal life? What are the biggest pushbacks or barriers that you get? Go ahead, Nancy.
Hey, you saw me on me. I'll jump on this real quick. Just want to hit on a couple points. So I think one of the first initial barriers that we get is, you guys are nuts. Like, you guys are crazy. How are you going to abolish prisons? Like, you are nuts. What are we going to do with all these people? And so I think just that initial resistance is what we at DJC are seeking to do in-house and also like outwards in community. It's really just political education, public education, communicating with folks, talking with folks, right? Because folks have only known this way of living, literally this way of living forever. This is all they know. And so now we're asking them to accept a whole new thing that does not exist, that they have never seen, but just believe that there can be something better. And so, of course, we are seeing hesitancy and resistance. Some may say it comes at a generational divide. Sometimes we can see that demarcation, but not always. Clearly, there are older folks who have lived through decades, and they're like, I'm ready for a change. So one, I think on like the legal end, it's only been hesitancy because of folks just not knowing another way. And it's like, well, you want the green pill or the red pill? Because I can open your eyes, like, come and buy what I'm selling you. And I think when folks actually sit down and engage in conversation, they understand that we are not some idealistic pie in the sky movement. We are literally talking, let us move resources from the police, from policing, from prisons, from surveillance into communities. Once folks have what they need to thrive, we will no longer need everything else. However, the second obstacle or resistancy, McKenna, is what Cait was touching upon, is economics. This whole system is based on capitalism, and it's based on anti-Black racism. And to be prison abolitionists, to be PIC abolitionists, you truly have to be anti-capitalist and you have to be anti-Black. This society is rooted in anti-Black racism. And so to say, now we want you to separate from that, there are too many facets that are involved that would involve people losing money in their pockets. And they have no intention of doing that. No matter how logical and much they understand, how much it's reasonable, how much it makes sense, at the end of the day, when you start messing with rich people's money, they're not going to be for it. So we know what happens in prisons, right? It's free labor. We understand what the 13th Amendment says. You know what I'm saying? And so we're fighting a really, really, really big fight, but it is not insurmountable. We've seen change happen. Clearly we've seen abolition from a slavery perspective. Folks never thought that they could devoid themselves from the economic system that was slavery. It was built into the fabric of this country. And for enslaved people to believe like, no, there's another way we can resist, that takes a lot of courage, because you have to see something that you have never seen. And that's what we are asking people today to see in terms of PIC abolition and prison abolition. but we're saying engage with folks, talk with folks so you can see that it is better. I'll just end with this last note because I know we're short on time, but we can do so many great things. My colleague says we can put a man on the moon, and you're telling me the only way we know how to deal with people is to stick them in cages and to subject them to abuse. I think highly of people. I think more than that. I have faith in us. And my last note, I know I've said that about 5 times now, McKenna, but my truly last note is I feel like Victoria and I are saying as Black women, we have a passion that we have to keep fighting, right? Because our livelihood is truly at stake. But I say to everyone, when Black people are free, and specifically when Black women are free, we will all be free. So when you fight for my liberation, you have fought for the liberation of the whole entire human race. Thank you.
Come on now. This is why I love Nancy Parker.
I could listen to one last thing all day. Go ahead, Victoria.
Let me add to that. When you speak about barriers, you cannot ignore the fact that our society has been taught to look at people who do bad things as bad people. And I have never bought into that. And every single time I have an opportunity to do so, I'm slowly trying to meet people where they are and educate them to get them to see they need to dig beneath the surface. Are these bad people, or are these people who have had bad things happen to them and our society has failed them in responding? Our society has forced them to just survive and, struggle on the margins as opposed to thriving like we've been talking about for the last hour. I also am struggling to encourage people to build a capacity for more empathy. When you understand that there's a person behind that charge, that there is a story connected to that person, you start to think about how horrible it is, how we're treating them, that we treat animals better than the Black and brown folks that we want to put into this system. Language like yard, movement, chow, feeding time, language that's used in our jails and prisons, that's farm language. You don't use that language for people, for humans. And you certainly don't think that one bad act or bad moment in a person's life should forever define them, that they are incapable of doing and being something better and different if they only had the resources, right? If they only had the support. And so when I'm out and I'm speaking to people, I'm often sharing stories, because when you share a story and experience, that connects and it allows people to put themselves in that person's shoes and say, that could be me. There are not many degrees of separation between myself and that next person, because like Nancy said, we are all connected. When you have, folks fighting on the front line for Black liberation, they understand that they're fighting for the liberation of all people, because we're not all free until we are all free, including Black folks. And, I think it's vitally important to get out, and when you're educating people, also put a deep emphasis on empathy and humanity and all people having value, right? Believing in redemption and in second chances. So if there is a moment where someone wants to cut off the conversation and say, no, but you can admit that they did something wrong, right? That they did something harmful, I can say yes, but the conversation doesn't end there, because they are still valuable human beings. They are capable of redemption, right? These are people that, given opportunities, given the resources, they will not cause harm in our communities. And it encourages the person on the other end of my conversation to really start to think and say, I'm now connecting the dots. I got to dig a little bit deeper and ask, what happened to that person that caused them to commit that act or that harm? And what can we do on the back end to go back and address that to begin with?
Go ahead, Cait. I saw you unmute.
Just the last thing to add, or the thing that's popping to my mind, is thinking about our political process and how we need to hold our leaders accountable. And I think we need to do that through continuing to build movements. So I'm thinking about how the Biden administration has been able to bomb Syria before they've been able to raise the minimum wage or pass any kind of financial assistance in the midst of this global pandemic that we're a year into. And I'm thinking about DPD's budget, which already claims 30% of the general budget of Detroit. And DPD is currently asking for a $41 million increase for the fiscal year of 2022. So people should, get involved and call the city council people in Detroit, explain to them, what could our community do with $41 million if we invested it in people? So that's my one thought of just the barrier of where we spend our money, and our priorities are very clear if you look at our budgets.
Thank you. Ellie, if you want to jump in, feel free, but I have a question in the Q&A, and I think we can connect it to kind of some things that Victoria and Nancy touched on. In abolition, as Cait has said that, and Nancy highlighted, this is a movement, and we are building that movement by connecting with people. And we talk about this, we're not dreaming of a pie in the sky. We're not dreaming of something that isn't achievable. One of our questions was, is there another example of a system that does it right or that does it better? And so I wonder, as you coalition build and have these conversations and people say it just isn't possible. I know, Nancy, you touched on, abolishing slavery. Are there other examples, or can you expand on that example on, what do you point to say, this is not unrealistic, this is possible, and we can do it right now? Whoever wants to jump in. That was a very long question. Is this what professors feel like when they cold call and no one answers? I'm gonna pick on and ask Nancy to jump in and ask if there's anything that you personally like to point to, or if you want to expand on the examples you gave earlier.
Sure thing. So clearly, in general, when we talk about abolition and even use the word abolition, right? The only thing that most folks most think about is slavery. And I really do think that is the most poignant connection, right? Because it's almost as if we're living in a slave state now, right? It's state-sanctioned violence with impunity, right? With no recourse. And so that's why, as abolitionists, we're like, okay, we need to go a different route. In terms of folks trying to think of like a better system in terms of like another country, pure pick abolitionists, again, we kind of shy away from pointing at the Sweden or the Iceland or the whatever countries that folks, the Denmarks, right? Where like, oh, their prisons are so pretty, you would love to go there for a vacation, right? So true pick abolitionists, that we're not trying to make prisons prettier. We're not trying to make prisons more inhabitable. We do not want prisons. And so I can't point you to something else. The something else is the future. The something else is the abolition. It is what we're working towards. And so again, it is possible. Look at slavery as the poignant example of there being seeming all encompassing, right? So there's no way to get out of this. This is just a state that we're in. And also use slavery as a point to understand where we are today. I'm not going to get into a history lesson, but police from the South, we got slave patrols. In the North, they were union busting. And so these forces have never been the friends of working class people, of Black people, of people of color. Police officers, police departments have always served to protect white property. And we saw that this summer, especially with all the marches here in Detroit and every other major city. And so I don't want to monopolize the time. Definitely want to give Ellie a chance to say anything else is on his heart. But I just want to impress on folks that, again, this is realistic, because if we can do all the great things that this country wants to say that we are so exceptional about, why are our minds so close shut when it comes to prison and punishment and our criminal injustice system? Why do we think that this is the only way? And why aren't we free or able to think farther out of the box? Insanity, the colloquial definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different outcome. Ellie said this already. We have seen that this does not work. It simply does not work. It is not keeping anyone safer, and we're only perpetuating harm. Violence begets more violence. Prisons and jails are sites of violence. Why would we continue down another centuries-long history of violence when we know it does not work? How about we take our collective minds as people, come together as a movement and find something better, find something creative. Again, I don't believe that people are irredeemable, like Victoria said. Your one bad mistake is not the sum of who you are. And so I believe in people. Hope is a discipline, it's a practice. We can all hope for a better future. Abolition is a practice. Let's do this, y'all.
I love that. Does anyone else want to give one final thought, or do we want to end it there? We've got 1 minute until I think our 1Ls and everyone has to go back to class, and I don't want to take up time. Go ahead, Victoria.
I will say to leave you all with these words. You've heard some quotes, some powerful, heavy quotes this afternoon. And as we talk about dreaming of a world that we all deserve to live in and want to live in, that we just don't have right now, if you're not dreaming big enough to be uncomfortable, then you got to keep dreaming, and you're not dreaming big enough. And I want to leave you with some famous words from Harriet Tubman as we continue running this race toward freedom, toward Black liberation, toward abolition. If you hear the dogs, keep going. If you hear the torches, if you see the torches in the woods, keep going. If they're shouting after you, keep going. Don't ever stop. Keep going. If you want a taste of freedom, keep going. Y'all keep going. We're not there yet, but if you keep going, we will be. If not in our lifetime or our baby's lifetime, in our baby's lifetime, just keep going.
Thank you. That was an incredible place to leave it. I want to thank all of our panelists. I'm going to ask that you stay just 1 minute. I think it'd be cool to take a picture. I think that we're missing out on those photo ops since we've been trapped in my house all year. But I want to thank everyone else for tuning in, and we had great turnout. It was so good to see so many names. This was incredible. It was important. It was heavy, but also so inspiring. And I feel honored and thankful to be in community with incredible mentors like the four of you, knowing that, you know, in a year and a half, when I finally hopefully get a JD and I become an attorney, that I have excellent examples of what to look for and who to build a movement with. This is so inspiring, and I just am so thankful for your time today.